I'm Jane Hansen, and this week in the arena, the political process, whether you are a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, or a Tea Partier, it's hard to see any progress being made by our elected officials in Washington these days. President Obama has tried to bring the parties together, but has met with resistance on party lines when it comes to health care, the economy, and national defense. So is our government broken? And if so, who's to blame? Joining us, Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, Grant Gallicho, the Associate Editor of Commonweal magazine, and Saul Erdman, the founder and president of the Center for Collaborative Democracy, and he's the co-author of this book called The Cure for Our Broken Political Process. Welcome. Thanks so much to all of you for being here. I want to read a direct line from your book. Congress is a black hole into which first-rate solutions disappear, never to see the light of day. Tell me what you really think, Saul.
Well, I think I'm not alone anymore. I think it's on national display that they can't solve our major problems. I mean, there's not one major problem that we've made progress on in a lot of years, and our problems are getting worse.
So what's a person to do?
Well, we have to take a very hard look at exactly why the system is broken and why our politicians do what they do. And the most important element is our election system. Politicians devote, I would say, the bulk of their energy on getting reelected. So we have to look at our election system. What does it drive our politicians to do? It drives them to behave destructively. Let me give you an example. Let's compare two members of Congress running for re-election. Let's call one Joe. And he runs for re-election by trying to convince his district's voters that the other party is corrupt, incompetent, and untrustworthy. And I don't care whether Joe is a Republican or Democrat, he can find countless of colorful examples of ineptitude by the other party. Mm-hmm. And so he paints a picture of the other party that his voters can't forget.
Right.
Let's take another politician, Sally. She runs for re-election by trying to convince her voters that her decisions on health care, taxes, the budget deficit, energy, public education, and so on are in her constituents' best interests. She would go crazy trying to make that case to voters. Because she, like every member of Congress, represents 700,000 people
who are completely diverse.
So completely diverse. They vary by age, they vary by income, they vary by political persuasion, they vary by family type. You go on and on. I mean, look at what happened at the, when...
Are you talking about the Tea Party?
Well, first before the Tea Parties, think of what happened when members of Congress tried to pitch their health care bill. Mm-hmm. They practically precipitated riots.
Right, that's true.
And I don't care what the bill had contained. The issue of health care is so divisive, it's so controversial that
it's so personal.
Exactly. And every person has different needs, concerns, values that no matter what had been proposed, there would have been an uproar from some blocks of voters. It's dangerous to propose a real solution.
The part that would be in dispute here, right, is the primary contention, right? Your premise, which is that the government is broken. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, you have to buy that premise first to cut to then say we want to make a change to the process.
Okay.
And if you take a look at American history, and you don't have to go. You can go right to the very beginning. You have this Alexander Hamilton is killed in a duel with a member of Congress. I mean, when you take a look at our own history, it's been contentious from the beginning. And at the same time, what you seem to be suggesting would almost take away the franchise, the one man, one vote, that notion that somehow I participate in a democracy, and my voice carries the same weight as Jane's voice.
That's not what I'm proposing. First of all, in terms of your first point about our politics has always been contentious, I'm not the person who said it, but it's perfect. Politics is not beanbag, and it never will be. It will always be contentious. Right. But if you look at our history, we have made progress. We've made enormous progress. We have dealt with our major problems. Each major problem we've encountered, each major crisis we've encountered, we've solved it. We've made progress.
The Civil War was one way in which we encountered a major crisis.
Yeah, it just seems to me
that
it's
been broken from the beginning.
But it just seems like crisis is solved by war.
There have been arguments made that if we had a slightly different election structure, there never would have been a civil war. So the Civil War was, in a sense, a breakdown of our political process. Give me an issue. I guarantee you there's a solution that will meet the needs of all sides. Basic needs. Not every need, but the basic needs of all sides. The Civil War was a breakdown of our political process.
Grant, what do you think about this whole concept of government being broken? Yes or no?
I don't think it's broken. I think Congress has some very serious problems with it right now. But I'm more curious about what Saul's solutions are. I mean, it's very hard for me to agree that there are issues on which we can get everyone to agree. There are problems on which we can get everyone to agree to a certain solution. But how do you see? What do you think the remedy to this problem is?
I'm suggesting that every voter have a real representative. I'm suggesting that instead of having one person represent 700,000 people of all kinds, that we enlarge the districts, have multiple representatives on various points of the political spectrum, and have every representative have exclusively constituents near him or herself on the political spectrum.
Like what? Like, there would be somebody for women, somebody for pro-choice, somebody for certain health reform?
Well, the Germans have tried a little bit like this, right?
Where
the Germans have tried this a little bit, in that they have university representatives.
Really. And the Germans have a mixture of what's called party list system and single-member districts like us. I'm proposing something different. I'm proposing that each representative have individual constituents whom he knows who they are and can communicate with them, so that every liberal lawmaker has hundreds of thousands of liberal constituents who have basically aligned his basic political platform, that every conservative lawmaker have hundreds of thousands of constituents who have basically aligned themselves with his basic political platform.
And this is not based on the territories. This is...
Well, you have to have some geographic boundaries. The Constitution says each state gets representatives in proportion to its population, so you can't have representatives in New York representing citizens in California.
So that would work in New York, where you've got how many representatives? But a state like South Dakota that has one congressman, how do you represent all of the people?
And here's the other thing is that people generally don't necessarily vote according to their party affiliation, right? I mean, New York, where in many cases you have 6-to-1, Democrat to Republican, that doesn't mean that they don't cross over and vote for a Republican candidate. Okay. So would they be precluded from that possibility?
Absolutely not. But let me give you an example. Let's take the most popular presidential candidates in the last election. Barack Obama, John McCain, Hillary Clinton, Mitt Romney, Mike Huckabee, let's throw in Michael Bloomberg, and let's say an Evan Bayh to fill up the center. And you had them representing a district. Now, how many voters would be unhappy to have one of them as their representative in Congress? I maintain that you would have 90% of American voters would be delighted to have someone like that among that field as their representative.
Okay, so then how do they reach an agreement once they're all there?
Oh, that's easy. There is not, look, take any issue, pick an issue, pick one issue that's divisive. Healthcare, fine, healthcare. How many people are being hurt by the current healthcare system?
A lot.
It costs more than any other country. Our healthcare outcomes are near the bottom of the list among developed countries. Clearly, there are multiple ways in which we can reduce the costs and improve care. Now, I'm not going to specify what they are. We'd be here for the rest of the year trying to iron them out. But the point is, there are groups that have reached unanimous agreement on a basic solution to healthcare, on changing the basic incentives of patients and doctors. That's what has to happen. And once again, I don't want to go into details of it, but there are clearly improved ways to improve health care. And if you came up with this group of representatives I mentioned could agree among themselves, honest representatives of their constituents of a solution, each one could go back to his constituents and say, look, this isn't a perfect bill. I'm one representative out of 435 people. I don't get to write the laws. This is as good as it's going to get.
Right, but this part of your interest is what I've been able to take care of.
Exactly.
But how are you not just exploding the problem of gridlock?
A labor union leader meeting with a management spokesperson. They start out with differing agendas. In fact, you could argue that their agendas are as different as Republicans and Democrats. Yet labor and management negotiators reach agreement that serves the needs of both sides, and sell the deal to their respective sides 96% of the time. How do you account for that?
Because they've got an absolute deadline. They know that sooner or later they're going to have to agree, because otherwise something happens.
You know what happens is the person they don't get paid on one hand, and I can't generate revenue if I'm the company. So
good point.
They're incentivized. Everyone is incentivized. But as you said, 96% of the time people come together. There's also, throughout that process, is the threat of a strike. I am going to walk away from the table. And
we don't have equivalent threats on the national level. Our energy policy is serving our interests. Our energy policy alone is ruining our economy. It's endangering our national security. It's hurting our environment. Our healthcare costs are running out of control. I can name problem after problem that require solutions. But politicians know that if they come up with a solution, they're going to lose their seats.
Sure, of course. Okay, keep that thought. You keep that thought, and you keep yours. And we're going to be right back. We're going to take a break, and we will continue this conversation right after this. Welcome back. Our topic today is the political process and whether or not that progress is working for the American people and making progress. Let us reintroduce our guest, who is Saul Erdman, and of course we've got Grant and Monsignor Harrington with us. So we've been discussing, and I want to make this very, very clear for the audience, about how the political process and our government seems to be broken, at least in your mind. I think one great example is right here in the state of New York, which you are very close to, Monsignor, is we've got an awful lot of discord about who's even really running our state right now.
This is an interesting thing, Saul, because it does go to your point, right? We basically have a one-party system in New York State.
And we have a non-functioning legislature.
And we have a non-functioning
for all
legislature.
intents and purposes.
Right.
I was talking to someone in California, and we said the difference between the two states is their legislature is broken. We don't have one.
Right.
For all
it really is astounding. But I mean, you see, take a look at the situation with Governor Patterson right now. I mean, basically, there are a lot of forces at work that want him out of office. You know, what has happened or hasn't happened, I don't know if it rises to the scale of pushing him out of office, but certainly it seems like there, and for a long time, almost from the moment that he was inaugurated as governor, people have wanted him out of that position. Maybe it was because he appointed Kirsten Gillibrand, and that angered a lot of constituencies. It seems to me, though, that what you've proposed, or what you're proposing, which is a radical change. I mean, you're basically saying no more 435 members of the House of Representatives.
No.
Well, the national, we're talking, now we're going to Congress.
435 representatives, but you have much larger, you could have the same number.
You choose them differently.
But it's not a geographic, your position would be, as I understood it, right, is that you would have a conservative, as a conservative, I would have a conservative member representing
Exactly.
you. A liberal would have a liberal member, and that basically they have to then go fight it out. So it's an ideological, basically districts are drawn ideologically as opposed to geographically.
But districts aren't drawn at all. I'm suggesting that let voters choose what do I want to be represented for. I'm not even suggesting it even be ideological. I'm suggesting voters choose.
Okay, so in the state of New York, we have how many representatives?
29.
Okay, so there would be an election where there would be...
No, I'm suggesting there'd be 5 districts of 5 representatives. I'm sorry, 6 districts of 5 representatives each.
So we're really talking about completely changing the way in which we elect people to office so that that in turn will help make our Congress more effective, that representatives won't be consistently running for re-election and doing all of their work on raising money and trying to explain themselves and trying not to irritate voters, and instead they will actually be chosen in ways that will really fit into the context of each individual group or person.
It's called the House of Representatives. It would at last be a true House of Representatives. Each representative would really have constituents who are aligned with him or herself. He would have an incentive to try and solve problems, and then he could go back to his constituents and say, this is how we need to do this. If we want to make progress, this is how we need to do it.
Tell me, how does growing the number of reps, how does that...
He's not talking about growing it, right?
I'm not growing the number of reps. I'm suggesting creating an alignment between each rep and his or constituents.
And
same number of reps.
So how would that change the ratio of solving problems to raising money?
You no longer would just have Republicans and Democrats, right?
You wouldn't have Republicans competing against Democrats. You would have conservatives competing with one another, saying, I'm going to do a better job of advancing your interests than the incumbent, or not. The incumbent, in order to stay in office, would have to say, I have advanced your interests, and here's how I've done it. You could not run for re-election in opposition to the other party. The only way you could run for re-election is say, look what I have achieved. You see, that's why it would completely change the game. Instead of having ideological opponents compete with one another, you would have ideologically like-minded people competing with one another, saying, I'm going to do the best job of moving forward on the issues that matter to you, the voters.
It's called being accountable. You call it something like...
I call it personally accountable representation. That's why it's unique. That's why it's very different from Germany.
Grant looks like he needs this to be explained a little bit further.
I'm still curious. Do you see public funding as the way forward in this proposal?
I try not to wade into that issue because in and of itself it's a very divisive issue. I advocate in the book partial funding so that candidates could get their basic message out to all their respective voters, and so voters would have enough information to decide. As far as being exclusively government financing, like I said, I don't want to wade into that issue. But
it does seem... Where is it working?
I'm now in conversation with several policy think tanks in California, several of which are very interested in this idea and believe that it would be very good idea for several municipalities in California to try an election approach such as we're advocating, because there are many municipalities in California that are in deep trouble, and of course the state of California is in enormous trouble. And if this idea of real representation, of a personally accountable representation, is proved to work at the local level, that will change the discourse to another level. People will see a functioning system of representation, and then what I'm proposing that now sounds radical will not be so radical anymore. People will start to agitate for it at the state level and ultimately the national level.
Do you have any relationship at all with the people in the Tea Party?
No, I don't. And I think that whether you agree with them or not, I think it's a symptom of our broken system. People are so dissatisfied and so distrustful. You see, that's what's troubling. They're so distrustful of
I
government.
understand, but the Tea Party charges people admission to come to their conventions.
I'm not advocating for
come
them.
on.
I'm not for them or against them. I'm simply
Right.
saying it's a sign
It's a
of
symptom. Yeah.
a sign of agitation, and that is dangerous. That level of agitation, level of mistrust is dangerous. It's very dangerous.
And so we've seen, the recent elections like Scott Brown in Massachusetts and some of the other things that have happened. I mean, I guess you would interpret that as also a sign of people's discontent.
Sure. And I think, unfortunately, one of the seeds of major change is discontent. Right. But the thing is, I think the discontent is a function of just how broken our system is. It's incapable of solving problems. Congress is now designed to ensure the re-election of its members. I'm proposing a Congress that is designed to solve America's problems.
Don't you think that making that change in and of itself would require, if the entrenched interests would have to give up their advantage? And why would one give up one's advantage?
The entrenched interests and the politicians, the incumbents, are certainly not going to be in favor of what I'm proposing. Like I said, what has to happen, it has to happen on the local level. Yeah. People have to see it really works, that politicians can solve problems and meet the needs of their constituents. When people see that, the voters can vote out of office anyone who resists the kind of change I'm proposing. Ultimately, the voters do have the power. They just need a motive to act in their interests, and they now haven't got a vehicle for acting in their interests.
And they need to feel empowered. So the book is called The Cure for Our Broken Political Process. Solomon, thank you so much for being with us. Certainly food for thought, but it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen tomorrow.
I recognize that.
All right. We will be back in just a moment, and we'll be joined by our regular contributor, Elizabeth Scalia, and we'll have some final thoughts. Stay with us. Welcome back. Continuing our conversation on the political process and its viability, we are now joined by the show's other regular contributor, Elizabeth Scalia, contributor to First Things and author of the blog, The Anchoress. Thank you. So, do you think our government is broken?
I tend to agree with Grant. I don't think the government is broken, and I think it's a dangerous thing to keep repeating it, because if people begin to think it's broken, you can descend into anarchy.
All right, so it's certainly frustrating.
Absolutely frustrating. I'm concerned because it seems to me that all we have in place in government anymore, whether on the state level or the federal level, is one corrupt crook who's out for himself after another. And I can't understand how any good person would be induced to go into politics at this point, because it's such a filthy, miserable game.
I'm a Catholic, so I believe that human nature is deprived, not depraved. So I kind of tend to. And I take a look at these elected officials. I think that basically first off, it takes a lot to face voters. I do think that when you're a person who runs for office and you have to face people who shout you down, I mean, basically there's got to be something wrong with you to be able to want to put yourself through that. But the fact is that most of them are really good guys. They work very hard. Do they make mistakes? Yes, they do.
Yeah, but everybody does.
Well, listen, I mean, I got 2 tickets to the World Series. I intended to pay, and all of a sudden now I'm being investigated because I take a bribe for 2 tickets to the World Series. By the way, I'm the governor of New York State. I think that that's a fake issue. It's made up, and it's all in gotcha politics.
Well, I agree with you.
And to me,
then
this
abusing the power by inserting yourself into a divorce proceeding is something entirely different.
Well, it wasn't
That's
even,
not a fake
But
issue.
the thing is that I really think that
we don't know where the truth is on any of that.
But you see, it's not about the wheels. The machine of government comes to a halt because some woman is claiming that she got a call from I mean, it's crazy to me that you see, there is no sense of proportionality right now that's going on. Bill Clinton gets impeached over his perjury. resulting from a case involving his affair with an intern. Do I think the affair with I think it's horrible, terrible. I'm not a proponent of these things.
Are those really instances of broken government? I mean, isn't that...
That's the point.
It's a
That's
much
exactly
larger...
the
I mean,
point.
you have a massive media, much larger than it was when
24 media,
when JFK was
That's
president.
Part of the problem is not so much that the government is broken, but that the media makes a huge deal out of everything, and people jump on board with it and go, "Oh yeah, let's
we
be
gonna
angry
bash
about
the
that."
media?
The
now?
bloggers.
I have a real problem with the media.
All right, but there's a problem with citizen journalists. I mean, that's another part of the problem, because everywhere you go, somebody can watch you and they can take things completely out of context.
No, it's certainly not just the media. There are consumers of media implicated. I mean, there are ratings involved here. People are still watching.
Because people basically want bad news. There's something.
What is the
about
definition of news? It's something extraordinary
yeah.
happening to somebody ordinary. It's not news when dog bites man, but it's news when man bites dog.
Yeah.
So, I guess my point is the scrutiny that any kind of a person in an elected office is under, I would think would be difficult in the very least and unfathomable at times.
I think it's got to be incredibly difficult. And I think there are, you take a look from the health care debate. I mean, I take a look at, first off, I mean, I don't subscribe to the proposition that we kind of had at the top of the show that, Obama is bringing everybody together and nobody wants to come together. He's an elected official, he's a politician, and I think he uses wedges as much as anybody else. So
sure.
I think that that's really important. I think that health care, bring everybody together was kind of a scam, and I really found it to be offensive.
Offensive?
Well, I found
what offended
what
you,
I found
Monsignor?
what I found to be offensive is that you roll in all these people and put a camera in the room, and instead of having some real results,
Are you
it
talking
becomes
when
a
he was
media
with the
circus.
Republicans? You
Yeah.
mean? Oh,
But you
okay.
have to, I mean, the GOP was complaining that Obama had been conducting the healthcare debate behind closed doors. So his response, all right, let's have a public conversation about it. How is that a scam?
I loved it, but I also thought it wasn't
Contrived?
particularly done in good faith. I thought that there was an element of contrivance.
I
to
think
it.
you could have had print reporters in there, and the environment would have been very, very different. You could have had reporters. The process could have been open. Having cameras, it's sort of like having cameras in the courtroom. All of a sudden, you have a very different dynamic. And I do
So
think
you are opposed to cameras in Congress?
No, I think I think the cameras in Congress are fine. I'm saying when you're trying to work out deals, when you're trying to come to coming to agreement.
That's not what that was. That was a kind of airing. I mean, they were not hammering out the details.
Well, no,
of
what
the
he
bill.
objected to repeatedly was exactly that they were airing. That's what he objected to. He
He's
was
not
trying to say
talking
we're
about
trying to
the-
get something done. When I take a look and say what's happening in our government, I mean, we basically have a government that's out of control on spending. This is a cost that's being passed off to children. Who's to blame? Everybody's to blame for this. Everyone's complicit in this. I mean, so from my perspective, I think people have a right to be mad as hell at their elected officials because these guys can't seem to shoot straight. We got out of control spending. We have people who are losing their health care coverage because they're changing jobs, right? And they have pre-existing medical conditions. That's something that's serious that needs to be taken care of. We have an enormous immigration problem in this country that no one seems
That
to be
no one wants
serious
to talk about.
to address. I mean, you have kids who have grown up here, basically, who grow up here, go to school here, they go to college here, and then they can't get a job. For all intents and purposes, they're Americans. From immigration to healthcare, national security, whatever you want to talk about, these guys can't shoot straight. And I think the reason why they can't shoot straight is in part because I do think the media has.
They're too busy watching out for their own image and protecting themselves. Is that true? Yeah. You have just given me ideas for about 5 more shows because we're out of time on this one. Last thought?
The government's not broken, but it does need some pretty serious tweaking.
Elizabeth?
This cure scares me because it's further balkanizing people, and I don't know how you get representatives, for example, who are liberals to willingly represent a conservative constituent. And bottom line, you need better leadership or nothing gets done anyway.
And you get one last word.
Can't we all get along?
Change.
Thank you very much, all of you, for being with us. And thank you for joining us. Remember, you don't need a TV to watch the net. We are always online at netny.net. For all of us, I'm Jane Hansen. We'll see you next week in the arena.